Alors, nous avons depuis 2 ans maintenant un projet sur le développement et c'est comment stimuler le développement, la construction des immeubles verts en Amérique du Nord. Et dans ce projet, on a plusieurs composantes et on a une composante qui vise un dossier très important, bien sûr, c'est comment financer. Parce qu'un des gros problèmes dans ce secteur que vous connaissez tous, c'est comment on peut stimuler le financement et faciliter le financement de la reconstruction d'immeubles existants, mais aussi de nouveaux immeubles pour qu'ils soient plus écologiques. On a une autre partie du projet qui vise la densification urbaine. Donc, je pense que Alain de Souza, qui était un de nos invités, pourra nous en parler un petit peu. On a un autre qui va être le sujet de la présentation aujourd'hui de Ann Edminster qui nous arrive de Californie sur l'éducation et la formation professionnelle. Et finalement, on en a un qui est un peu plus vague, mais qui vise essentiellement le Mexique, qui est sur la certification. Et quand je voudrais dire certification, ce qu'on essaie de faire, c'est essayer de voir si on peut harmoniser entre les 3 pays un même niveau de certification, utiliser les mêmes données, les mêmes types d'analyse pour qu'on puisse essayer de faire avancer un espèce de mouvement écologique dans le développement des immeubles durables.
The umbrella theme today really is how do we use all of the tools in our toolkit to create a cultural shift that is more conducive to greener projects so that this really becomes the norm for all of our institutions where green is no longer green, it's just the way we do things.
Clearly in a sustainable development plan you may come up and have to deal with how you're going to tackle certain issues that affect your community, whether it be reduction of greenhouse gases, water consumption, waste materials generated, energy efficiency, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. And so in preparing our own plan for the city of Montreal and for the island of Montreal, we had to come up with ways and means in which we would achieve that objective, those objectives, not one objective, but several. Green buildings was a logical action that emanated from our sustainable development plan. Why? Because 30% of greenhouse gases come from buildings. Buildings use a lot of water, a lot of materials, a lot of resources, so on and so forth. So for us, that was a way in which we could go and which we could do. But we did realize that we didn't, when we were starting, we were a little bit like St. John the Baptist in the desert, you know. There was really no one listening. And we realized that we had a lot of impediments. There was no in-house knowledge in our own staff with it. There was not necessarily external knowledge with architects, with engineers who were capable of doing that type of thing. The builders felt that, look, they were making money, why should they stop? Why should they change their model? The financiers were not convinced that a greater deposit or a greater initial outlay was worth it. And two, they weren't convinced as well that there was no there weren't clients who would be willing to rent or lease the buildings that would be built. And so there was a whole slew of issues that had to be dealt with in terms of trying to be able to create a critical mass of knowledge base to be able to succeed. And that's where the city came in. The city passed a policy in June of 2009, almost 4 years ago, where we said every new city building would be required to seek LEED Gold certification. And every renovation done to the tune of 500 meters or more would have to be done according to the standards of LEED Silver. At the time we became probably a rare breed. Most other cities were at silver, and at the time we were one of the few who poked our head a little bit above. We said that if we were going to be competitive, let's come up to a different platform, choose a different, more competitive platform. And so we sought LEED Gold status for our buildings. We chose an international standard because we felt it would be easier for everyone concerned, and that's why LEED was the one we went with. We felt it would be easier for people to understand, tap in, ascribe to, certify, and be recognized.
Why the Montreal City don't build all LEED Platinum building? Why go for less than Platinum? What's the thinking behind that? And I've built this building, and I can tell you, on the formal regulatory level, I haven't seen anything helping me doing what we did here. We did receive some money from the two levels of government here, but at regulatory level, nothing. There's some incentive, nearly all related to energy efficiency, and nearly all related to the payback, you know, how much money Hydro-Quebec can save from saving energy instead of producing it with new infrastructure. And we're not even talking about the federal government in this country, which beside what's happening at Ressources Naturelles Canada, which is an amazing scientific research that has a fantastic scientific research program related to some issues pertaining to green building, well, they're cutting everywhere. We have received $250,000 for this $27 million project from the federal government, which for me doesn't make sense. It's proof again that where are the incentive?
Although we know that the Quebec government and the federal government have some policy that, you know, their buildings or the space they're renting has to be LEED, it's not enough, because if they should preach more by example. There is also the big concern that we have, and is the education and training of everybody in the construction industry. The people I work for, they were there 10 years ago, and they were preaching in the desert. Now, they see that it has moved. Not fast enough, but it's moving. But we have to continue, apply pressure, and provide research means for people that want to do more green buildings to be able to do so. Financing is a key issue.
Years and years and years, I realized that one of the things I heard repeatedly was that every single person had decided they had to do green building, and then later figured out how to make it viable from a business perspective. And so then I started to think, well, this implies a moment of conversion from that, this is the way we do things, why change, to I need to change. So then I started thinking, okay, well, how do we create moments of conversion for people? And I started asking colleagues in my industry this question: how do we create this conversion? And a lot of the answers that came back were around education, but also sharing our own stories of conversion. And I think that was one of the most powerful things I heard, is people talking about, this was my experience, this is how I came to green building, why it was important to me. So it's interesting, there's education, but there is also this element of evangelism, you know, and advocacy and passion. I think one of the things that we all need to look to is, how do we take what we know, you know, solid information, but also our passions around this, and turn it into inspiration?
Inspiration has all different types of sources. Depends who you're talking to. When we're talking to like the general audience, we'll talk about environmental issues and how big an impact buildings their homes can have on environmental issues, and that's inspiring. But for the business sector, who make decisions about basically what's going in the ground, what's inspiring is profit margins. We have the same resource scarcity, which is our biggest challenge. It's come up already a few times. Electricity rates are just too low and don't give the public an incentive or building owners a huge financial incentive to do anything. So that's, I think it's our main challenge, as you say, at this point for us here is trying to make a business sense out of green building when we don't pay for water and very little for energy, and very little for materials. I mean, we produce most stuff like right here.
One of the things in California that works in our favor is we have for a long time had legislation pushing energy usage down. We have legislation that affects waste production, and we have drought conditions with great regularity. So, and also we've got a lot of stormwater issues, and so many of the things that LEED addresses and that all of our green building agendas address tend to be much easier to deal with in California because we are so accustomed to those.
A few years ago, a lot of people were working on their individual issues and succeeding and not succeeding. I mean, the Maison du Développement Durable was a success in terms of building, but everyone was kind of trying a lot of projects, and a few people here can attest to that. And I think what's happening now is that people are realizing that there are successes. We kind of crossed the threshold of problems, at least in terms of the building industry. But I think the one challenge, though, is the building industry, the construction industry is a bit of a taboo subject here in this province right now. But it is, there has to be a cultural shift in that, and I'm sort of dismayed that there aren't more people from the construction industry this evening here, because this is where a lot of work has to be done, and we're seeing some improvements in this field. But if the governments aren't creating frameworks for these incentives, and private sector or residents don't necessarily see the financial incentives, and the construction industry doesn't pick up the slack, we're not gonna move to the pace that.
Hearing what you were saying and what everyone is saying, we're already converted, so we're not the ones that need to be convinced. So the objective also for the foundation is to demystify all that, because people get a headache. For you talk about eco-friendly building, oh, it's too complicated, I don't want to know about it. So it's how to make it accessible to people who aren't converted, and we're not going into an evangelistic thing like you said, but to just make it really, really basic 101, so that simple questions can be asked, and people can make their decisions based on those, like, let's say 5 key questions. Is it local? Is it durable? Is it recyclable? Is it energy efficient? Is it very energy costly at the fabrication? And if you can have like 3 of the 5, then you're in the right direction. And people will always ask what
in which cities can play an active role. I'll give you an example. I heard earlier about design, right? Well, in Montreal, we have taken the challenge of not only having green buildings, but well-designed buildings through architectural competitions. And the challenge that represents to architects, to engineers who are bidding on the process and complying with all the legal rules that the government puts for us to put into place to avoid consortiums and corruption and collusion and all of that fun stuff, has resulted, though, in some very nice, beautiful buildings. The planetarium is one that's got LEED Platinum certification, but also went through. Yes, you can provide incentives, but not, I don't think we should be dependent on incentives. And I'll give you an example. I had one developer come to me in the industrial sector and said, look, Alan, I can't do this. It doesn't make sense. The numbers aren't there. So we came out with a program for the city that was in place as recent as not too long ago. I think it'll be renewed by the administration. But where there was a tax credit, a municipal tax credit over a 5-year period, where if they complied with LEED certification, there was a top-up. So over 5 years, there was a tax holiday. That spurred the same developer who told me 5 years ago that it couldn't be done, today has 28 industrial projects, not just in my community, but in other communities across.
I was talking to a colleague a year or so ago about the phenomenon of small organizations doing exactly that, banding together, and he said, oh, it's like a pterodactyl, you know. Pterodactyl from the air looked really big because it spread its wings and cast this huge shadow when really it wasn't that big a creature, you know, the wings fold up to nothing. So when green organizations band together, you can create the virtual pterodactyl, right? You create the sense of something larger by leveraging one another's efforts. So I'm wondering if there's any of that sort of thing going on of helping.
Donc F, la Fondation Écologia. Moi je trouve que Écohabitation a fait une très grande effort pour le Québec au cours des dernières années, puis je tiens à les féliciter. Nous, quand on les a rencontrés pour faire le projet LEED, ben, ça nous a forcé évidemment, toutes les étapes du projet LEED nous forcent à se poser des questions sur, bon, quels matériaux on va prendre Pourquoi? Aussi, au niveau des bâtisses écologiques, je pense qu'un parallèle peut être fait avec la nourriture biologique. Puis, dans la nourriture biologique, on paye des fois plus cher parce qu'on commence à réaliser qu'on a autre chose aussi. La pomme ou la poire qu'on achète, c'est une pomme, une poire, mais elle a peut-être une ADN ou en tout cas une façon de faire. Si cela, on sait qu'en ce moment, c'est un petit peu plus cher, comme la pomme et la poire biologique, mais qui va apporter d'autres facteurs. Puis ces facteurs-là, on commence à les mettre de l'avant parce que tout le monde a le goût de bien dormir, de se sentir bien chez eux. Puis donc, c'est de ces qualités-là de l'habitat, de commencer à en parler également. Donc, c'est pas quantitatif, c'est qualitatif.
Et les ouvriers ont très peu d'influence sur les choix qui sont faits. Les ouvriers ont peut-être la moitié de 1% de l'impact environnemental du bâtiment qui repose sur leurs épaules. C'est pas mal plus au niveau de la conception que ça se passe. Et ceux qui commandent une conception, c'est beaucoup les promoteurs. On peut faire d'énormes gains au niveau du bâtiment, mais si on planifie pas nos villes de façon plus sensée au niveau de la dépendance automobile, on fait pas de gains quantitatifs au niveau environnemental.
En tout cas, si je regarde les cursus dans les collèges et dans les universités, combien d'heures un architecte va recevoir sur le bâtiment écologique dans sa base de formation au Québec? Même pas 35. Même pas 3 crédits. À moins qu'ils choisissent de se diriger vers là. Les ingénieurs, on n'en parle même pas. Des ingénieurs en bâtiment, il en sort presque plus. Des ingénieurs civils qui vont faire que l'aménagement des villes va être beaucoup plus durable.
There is huge influence on the design side, but also on construction. In fact, one of my colleagues whose background is as a mechanical system subcontractor says the person who has the most influence on the ultimate performance of the project is the worker on the ground, because ultimately they can make substitutions that are inappropriate, or it's essentially the quality of execution is sort of the unwanted stepchild in the equation of green building. We tend to forget that execution. So we need to be thinking about the workers as well as the professionals.
We don't have a financial challenge in the building industry and in the world. We don't have a technical challenge. We have a cultural. If you accept that, of course, you have to conclude that there's no one thing you need to do. There's so many spots, so many targets. So education is certainly one target. The skills of the worker is certainly one target. Financing is certainly one. Subsidies. I dream of the day when the green economy receives 1/100th of the subsidy that the oil company. But those things are not important as compared to the change in the culture. And the culture is in our head. For many people, green is just energy efficiency, basically. In Quebec, we don't talk about water. We're not interested by water at all. Like it doesn't exist, or there's too many of it. So we need to change the way we think about life. We go back to your example, we were great about our organic food. What we build, most of our houses that we build, even if they're LEED Platinum in Quebec and in the United States, they're cardboard boxes. They're green cardboard boxes, but they're still cardboard boxes. How do we expect to be inspired by such an environment? Frankly, is beyond me.
Don't be shy. Speak out. Everybody speak out about it all the time. Bore everyone till the end of time, because this is how we make a cultural shift, is by not having our voices silenced.